Hey guys, this is Asante here from the Tech Muse Academy with one more mixlessons.com video quick tip for you. This one comes again from a fellow member of the Gear Sluts web forums who goes by the name John the Cut. He had a question concerning workflow, I suppose you could say. Let me read it for you. He says, I was wondering how most people go from the arrangement part of a project to the mix stage. If you're arranging, recording and programming sounds in your DAW of choice, how then do you start a mix? Do you bounce all sounds out at 0 dB or leave them at their arranged volume levels? Do you bounce with or without effects and or bounce the effects separately? Do you just continue from arranging and start mixing right there, or do you at least reset the mixer? How do you finalize the sounds? Are there multiple layers like a pop, snare, etc.? Do most of you have separate mixing platform, or do you mix in the same DAW? Any pointers would care to share would be greatly appreciated. So it's a good question, and it's one that, like most things that we talk about here, there's no one definitive answer. People have different workflows, but I can certainly explain to you the way I like to approach it and the reasons why perhaps you might find them insightful. I do personally like to create definite segmentation between the phases of the music production process. So when I'm composing and arranging, say in Logic or Cubase, and I'm coming up with my parts, I'm recording in my MIDI tracks, I'm playing with my VST instruments, software synths, etc., I consider that one phase. And when I'm about to start my mix, I like to completely wrap that up. And so what I mean by that is I will take all of my VST instrument channels and convert them into 24-bit audio, high bit depth audio. So if I'm using, say, Omnisphere for some pads, and I've got a MIDI part that's controlling that, I will export the audio from the Omnisphere instrument or whatever other instruments I might be using, bring them back into the project as the highest bit depth audio possible, and then I would disengage the plugins and I would put those MIDI tracks in a backup folder. In Cubase, which is my DAW of choice, you're able to create folder tracks which are just purely for organizational purposes on the screen. So I always create a folder called backup, and I'll drag all of the MIDI parts, the software instrument parts, into that, disengage the instruments so that you're freeing up your system resources, and then just fold that track backup folder out of the way so it's there if you do need to revisit and maybe edit the MIDI, re-export the audio if you come into some new ideas further along in the process. But the instruments themselves are no longer sapping your system resources, and you've got a nice clean audio file to work with. I'll also do the same for any, say, amp modeling. If I'm using Guitar Rig or Amplitude to get a guitar tone, for example, then I will experiment, get my guitar tones the way I want them to sound, and then same thing, I'll bounce the audio out, disengage the modeling plugins, put the direct clean guitar channel, which I was using to run through the amp modeler, in the backup folder, mute them all at the track level, and so that they're not being heard, they're not being processed anymore, but they are still there in case I want to revisit them. So when I'm about to mix, when I'm getting ready to mix, I should have nothing but pure audio files on the screen, 24-bit wave files on the screen. From there, what I like to do is organize my screen a little bit if I haven't already done so during the arrangement phase. And so I will group like tracks. If I've got multiple drum channels, I'll put them all in a folder called drums. I'll route them all to a group channel called all drums. I also might do subgrouping. So I might take my 3 tom mics routed to a group, a bus called toms, which then routes to the bus called all drums, which of course then routes to my main stereo outputs. So I like to set up my screen and set up my routing. I also like to create a couple of sort of go-to standard effects sends. I'll create a short reverb and a long reverb, maybe a room and maybe a plate, and then I'll create a delay aux as well, so that those are available to me if I want to quickly throw a vocal to the plate reverb just to sort of wet it up a little bit and hear how it's going to sound in the mix. Might go and revisit those plugins later, might even switch to an entirely different plugin later, but I like to have something set up in the beginning so that I can quickly throw things around and sort of flow with my own creativity. So in the end, I have a screen of nothing but 24-bit wave files routed intelligently so that I have a hierarchy of control. If I want to do something to the drum kit, there's a fader. If I want to do something to the toms, there's a fader. If I want to do something to just the floor tom, there's a fader there as well. So I like to do the routing, and then I like to set up my standard go-to effects auxiliary sends, the effects buses, that I can send whatever channels I want to as well. At that point, I save as a new version, and I'll call it something like mix start or something of that nature, and then I can proceed with my mix from there. So I hope you find that helpful, and we'll see you on the next quick tip.